And I do love that you shared the story of my father. He is my hero. And he is one of the big reasons I'm interested in apologetics, from his example, from his life. And I think his story really illustrates why apologetics matter so much today. And I'll frame it in two ways. Number one reason apologetics matters is because there's unbelievers who have genuine questions about the faith. There are people who have genuine intellectual barriers about the Bible, about the person of Jesus, about the nature of truth, about the problem of evil. And our job is to be ready with an answer to help them see that Christianity is actually true. And that was my dad's story that you mentioned, Bill. He actually grew up in a really troubled background with abuse in his family, a sister who took her life. My grandpa, his dad, was the town alcoholic. And he was searching for ways of happiness, was challenged by some folks. This is back in the 50s to consider the claims of Christ. And he thought it was a joke. So he set out before any modern day apologetics movement. There was basically C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer, not much else to prove that it was wrong. But then he was surprised by the evidence, but he would say really drawn by the love of God, and ended up becoming a believer. And as you mentioned, more than a carpenter. This highlights one reason why apologetics is so important today. There are non-believers in our workplace, in our families, in our communities who have genuine intellectual barriers to the Christian faith. And our job is to be ready with an answer. That's reason number one why it matters. Second reason why it matters is to strengthen believers. There's so many Christians out there that have an emotion-filled faith, an experience-based faith, but they don't really have an intellectual faith. And then when we begin to learn that these things are actually true, not just stories we've been told, there's a certain level of confidence that often comes with this. So for years, when I was teaching high school full-time, high school Bible, I would take students on trips to places like Berkeley, where we'd bring in atheists to speak to our students. We take students on trips to Salt Lake City, and we go visit BYU, and we bring in some Mormon missionaries, and we teach our students how to have spiritual conversation with folks and defend their faith. And I get a call from this high school student of mine. He goes, "Hey, this is right after we got back from the trip." He said, "We just invited some Mormon missionaries over. We're having a conversation. Could you answer this theological or apologetic question?" Now, I forgot what the question was, but what happened is they had gotten this apologetics training, and as a result, it gave them confidence. So really, the reason I'm so passionate about this course, and I hope that you'll join us, is because we want to equip you to have answers for non-believers, but also strengthen and build up your faith. Now, before we get into some of what we'll be talking about in the course, what do we mean by apologetics? Now, probably most, if not all of you, have a sense of what apologetics is, but it's amazing how much even misunderstanding there is. And of course, it has nothing to do with apologizing for your faith. We actually, because I teach in a master's program of apologetics at Biola that's been there over 20 years, we've had people call up and complain about why we have classes of people apologizing for their faith. And the problem is they don't understand what we mean by apologetics. Interestingly, when Plato wrote his defense for Socrates, what he wrote is he called it an apology. So in Greek, an apology is to make a case for something. It's a defense for something. So it's not just a Christian term. There's apologists for Islam. There's apologists for atheism. There's apologists for a certain kind of car that you should buy. If you should go electric, there's apologists for certain political parties. But we're also called to be apologists for the faith. And of course, we see this in 1 Peter 3:15. Where Peter says, "Sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart. Always be ready with an answer for the hope within. Give it with gentleness and give it with respect." And of course, the Greek term there, apologia, is what's often translated as apologetics. Now, Os Guinness, one of my favorite thinkers today, he said one of the reasons apologetics matters today is because really everybody is an apologist. We are. I mean, look at our culture. Even a lot of what social media does is people are presenting themselves to the world. They're making a case for a certain kind of life that they're living. So the question is not really, are we apologists? In fact, I believe it was C.S. Lewis who said it's not whether we are apologists. The question is, what kind of apologists are we? How effective are we in the apologetics that we do? And what's fascinating about apologetics is it's not a spiritual gift. We have teachers, we have evangelists, even though we're all called to teach and evangelize to a degree. Doing apologetics is not a spiritual gift. Now, there might be some people more inclined than others towards it or wired a certain way, but we're actually all called to be ready with an answer for the hope within. That's you and that's me. So apologetics, in a sense, for everyone. Now, I might add a third reason why it's important: strengthen believers. Number two, reach non-believers. But I also say it also helps cut some of the bleeding of young people disengaging the faith. There's been a ton of talk recently about the nones, Nones, and the amount of people disengaged. In fact, I'm reading this big book right now by this sociologist by the name of Jean Twenge, and it's called Generations. And she walks through all the generations up to Gen Z, and then now she calls the younger generation polars. And she talks about how millennials down have increasingly become a more and more secular generation that have genuine questions about God. So if we care about our kids, we care about our kids in the church, one thing we have to do is teach them how to know that the Bible's true, God exists, why evil happens in the world. So apologetics helps to cut some of the bleeding of young people disengaged in their faith. Now, I'm not saying it's all intellectual, but I'm saying this is one piece that really matters. Now, there's other reasons why, but from evangelism, strengthening believers, to stopping young people from disengaging their faith, that in itself is huge when it comes to apologetics.